Welcome to Property Mama Adventures in Real Estate, episode 35. Here each week we share the shenanigans, the goings on in the world of real estate. If we've not met before, my name is Wendy Chamberlain and I'm a buyer's advocate and buyer's agent here in Melbourne, Australia. So each week we share whatever has been going on in the world of real estate. We're dealing with lots of emotions with real estate agents, with buyers, with sellers. And this week we're going to look at some of the things that I have heard about or seen or personally had the pleasure of experiencing with renters, with tenants. So anyone that has invested in real estate where they're not living it in the home themselves will have sourced a person to live in the property. So here in Victoria, they did change the names recently. You're no longer a tenant, you're a rental provider, and you're no longer a landlord. You're not a rental provider. You are the rental provider is a landlord. If you're renting a property, you're a renter. You're not a tenant. And if you're providing the property for rent, you're no longer a landlord. You are a rental provider. So those changes came about. Ultimately, it's the same thing. You are renting a property, you're a tenant. If you're renting out your property, you're a landlord. I don't know exactly why they changed the naming of it, but they did here in Victoria. So very, very interesting. Now, I will at the outset say I understand what it is like to be a renter, to be a tenant, because we have ourselves rented in the past. So it can be a tricky situation. And I know personally when we did rent, we rented for a short time, that you always do have this kind of this little inkling in the back of your mind. It's like this niggling feeling because you don't own the property, you don't have any control over the property. And I think that is what can cause uncertainty and anxiety sometimes for tenants, for renters. So I get that, because what happened for us, we were renting for 12 months somewhere, and we were planning a trip to go overseas, which was going to be a 4-week trip to Europe. This is quite a few years ago. And about 4 weeks before we were going to go on our big 4-week trip, the landlord gave us notice to vacate because they wanted to sell the property. So we were 4 weeks out from having to pack everything up to go overseas, and then you get this notification from the landlord that you have to move. So I 100% get it, because we had that experience, and you do have that anxiety and that you don't feel settled. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. You don't always feel settled because you don't own the home. And I've heard stories of people that have lived in homes for 10 years, 15 years, and then there's a change of circumstance for whatever reason, and the owner of the property decides to sell. So because you don't own the property, you don't have control over that. So I understand what it is like from that emotional standpoint. Now, renters choose to do so because it's not necessarily a monetary thing. Sometimes they want to be, they might have bought properties elsewhere, invested elsewhere, and they want to live in a certain area because it suits their lifestyle. That's not the case for all folks. Some folks just love to rent. Some people can't afford to buy, so their choice is that they have to rent. But we have had experiences with having to deal with tenants, because that's what we do when we are working with clients who are looking to sell a property. And where the property is tenanted, we have a process that we go through so that we do respect the rights of the tenant, because they're the one living in the property, so it is their home. And so we do like to make sure that they understand the process that is going to take place for the sale of the property, the timelines that are involved, the level of access that's going to be required, the need to come in and take photos of the property. And then certainly here in Melbourne, where we auction properties a lot, it tends to be a 4-week campaign. And so there's 4 weeks of opens, which generally is at least 2 access requests through that week, because we have opens on the Saturday, and there is generally also an open for inspection that happens midweek. And then additionally to that, via appointment, there will be private inspections as well that take place. So there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to selling any property, and then there's an additional level of complexity when you're also dealing with someone whose house it is that they're living in. That's not the owner of the property, they're renting the property. And there were within the last few years, changes here in Victoria, certainly around all of the rules in relation to the notifications and timelines and things like that that have to be given to a renter or a tenant that is living in your property. So one thing that I would suggest to anybody that owns a property that is looking to sell that property and it is rented out to somebody that is living there is understand those rules and regulations for your local jurisdiction, because they're all different no matter where you live, whatever state of Australia or where you might be in the world. There's going to be specific rules and legislation and regulations for your home that you're renting out no matter where you are, and you must make sure that you do fall within those parameters. You've got to follow the letter of the things, because otherwise, well, at a minimum, you're upsetting people. You could get into problems. You could be taken to the, well, here in Victoria, it's VCAT, but there's all types of different bodies that do the legislation to protect the rights of all parties. That's the whole idea behind it. Whether or not you agree with it or not is another matter, but that's why those bodies are there, so that it's an opportunity for everybody's voice to be heard. So we recently were selling some properties for a client of ours. There were a number of properties on the block, so there were some townhouses that were needing to be sold, and we were selling one, and then we were going to look at selling others in the same block. So we had one of the properties on the market. They were all rented, by the way, and so we'd had the conversation with the tenant who was renting the property that we had on the market at that point in time, and then we were going to see how that progressed, or how that sale went, and then we'd look at selling the other properties. Well, what happened one day was, obviously, people within the block had been talking to each other, or they'd been seeing, there's a sales board right at the front, so you know the property's for sale. So they'd see the real estate agents coming, opening it for inspection. They have buyers coming through the property. Now, as I said, there's a number in the block. What happened was the renter from one of the other properties basically bailed up the real estate agent. They said, this is interesting, because at the time when they went, and they were actually quite confrontational and aggressive with the real estate agent, and they didn't do it to one of the male real estate agents, they did it to one of the female real estate agents. So she was there, she'd opened the property, and this renter went up to her and I said, "Oh, I see you coming down the line." And she's like, "What? I know you're probably going to wanting to be sell the property that I'm in. Well, that's not going to happen. I'm not going to let that occur." And I was thinking, well, you don't own the property, but there's a way to go about things. And so being so confrontational to a real estate agent who was just there not to talk to you, but to actually do her job, which was to sell one of the other properties in the complex, that behaviour is not on. So that got reported back to us, and we share what goes on through any sales campaign with our client. And I mentioned that to our client, and he was not impressed by that. Because that person was effectively suggesting that they would make it very, very difficult to sell the property that they were living in. So that's not going to go down really well with your rental provider, with the landlord. I don't know. I don't understand why you would do that, because it's not going to be received very, very well. Anyway, things progressed. We did sell the property that we had on the market at that particular time. So a decision was made to sell a number of the other properties in the complex as well. So circling back around to what I said about the legislation changes, here in Victoria, they have made it a very, very tight, small number of reasons why you can ask your renter to leave if you want to sell your property. If the renter is in a fixed lease and it's their first lease, not after that, but if it's their first lease and it's a 12-month lease, you have to give them 90 days notice. If you miss the 90 days, you actually, except for some very specific reasons, you can't ask the renter to leave the property. So luckily, the reason that we wanted to vacate the tenant out of the property was because the property was being sold. And that is one of the reasons. So certainly here in Victoria, there's limited reasons. One is that you're selling your property. One of the other ones is that you're renovating or demolishing your property. And the third one is that you're moving back in yourself, or you're moving in, family members moving back in. So they're very, very strict reasons amongst some others. And so our client had the intention all along to sell the property. So we were able to provide the necessary notification to the tenant to ask them to vacate the property. So we're in the process of getting that all organised, and I went past the property because it's not too far from where I live, and I noticed that there was something there, that we had another property that we were getting ready. So like I said, there was a number inside of the property boundary. We had another one that we're getting ready. The renter had moved out. We were just getting it ready, and things were happening that following week. And I happened to walk past and I saw that the one of the renters from one of the other properties had parked their car blocking the property that we were going to be selling. So I popped my head in, knocked on the door and said, hey, introduced who I was and said, look, would it be okay if you moved your car, because we need access to the property? And the tenant, he was lovely. He was very lovely. He was very polite. He introduced himself and he got in his car and he moved it straight away. He was very, very polite. However, I have a feeling that's because he didn't realise what I represented. As in, I represented the my client, who was the one that was going to be selling the property, and that he actually thought I was moving. I said, no, I'm not moving in. We're going to be selling the property, but we just need access to the property. So I don't think he quite understood exactly. But anyway, he was lovely. He was very, very polite. That's all good. So I'd actually met him. So shortly thereafter, we did issue for everybody in the property block notices to vacate, because we wanted to have availability to the properties in the timelines that we needed, circling back around again to all of the rules that have changed here in Victoria and having to give these notification periods on correct documentation, etc., which we did so that we didn't have any issue with any of our timelines on being able to sell the properties that my client owns, which is his right to do. He can sell his properties. So that's what we did. Notices to vacate were issued to the remaining renters, all fine. So again, we followed the exact things that we needed to do in relation to how they were issued, the timelines, because you've got to do it. There's a whole raft of things now. You can't do it too soon. You can't do it too late. You've got to It's all very, very quite regulated now, and we stuck to it to the letter. To the letter, I will say. So my client wanted for a buyer to come through and have a look at one of the properties, which just happened to be the property that this particular person that I had met was occupying. He'd been given his notice to vacate. There was a date on that, and he was occupying the property still. So there was two people living in the property. So I got the details of of where to call, and I rang one of them. It wasn't him. I rang the other person that was living in the property, and I had a conversation with her about wanting to come through on a certain day at a certain time. I explained all that was going on and the reasons for it, etc. I was following the letter of the law to a T. She was lovely. That was going to be fine. I think I was talking to her at about 11 o'clock in the morning, and it was a Friday. I remember that. And everything was good. Confirmed it all. No problems at all. Well, little did I think, I thought there would be no problems at all. I got a text message that night, I don't know, 6:36 p.m. I got the nastiest, rudest text message from somebody. Basically, now clearly, I mean, I don't know, but I do know, clearly he has got hold of her phone and busy typing in the text message, and told me in no uncertain terms I was not welcome to come to the property, I was not entitled to do so, and that if I showed up at the property, they would call the cops. Okay. All right. We did not do anything wrong here. We followed the letter of the regulations of what we're supposed to do with the notification periods. It wasn't too soon. It wasn't too late. Like I'm saying, it's all very, very complicated. But they basically decided that we weren't allowed to have any access until they moved out. Until they moved out, we weren't allowed to have any access. And I think sometimes you just got to go, okay, all right, so could I have barged my way in there? And yeah, I could have, because I would have been within my entitlement to be able to do that. But is it worth doing that? No, I don't think it is. So I just left it. I didn't even bother replying to them. This is crazy. So, but that's the kind of thing that, yeah, he was lovely when I met him in person. But like I said, he didn't know what I represented to him. When he knew that I wanted to get access to bring a buyer through, etc., the whole thing changed. Like the whole persona changed. So I just left it there. They have since moved out, and we now have access to that property again. So yeah, like I don't understand it. That apparently they were fine. They left the property in pristine condition, which we were a bit surprised about, actually, based on his behaviour and how he was. I actually thought he might not have left it in the condition they did. It was actually beautifully left, spotless. So that was a win. That was wonderful. So one of the other, the renter that was in the first property that we were putting on the market to sell, they were in a fixed lease. Now, these particular properties, the demographic that love to buy them are first home buyers. First home buyers want to move into properties straight away because it's their first home, they're wanting to move in. Now, we have, when working with our clients before, where we've purchased a property for a person who's a first home buyer, you can become what I like to call a short-term landlord. So for first home buyers here in Victoria, as long as you move in to the home within the first 12 months, you then can still access any of the government perks or benefits in relation to being a first home buyer. And the main one around that is concessions around stamp duty and things like that. But they're the rules. And so as long as you're moving in inside of 12 months, you can still access that property by being a first home buyer. And some of our clients in the past have been fined to buy a property knowing that the renter is going to be moving out within a few months. So certainly if they're in a fixed term lease, you can't ask them, you cannot get them to leave unless they choose to leave. They may choose to break the lease because they know the home is being sold, and then the landlord or the rental provider can say that's fine to do that, and you let them go on their way, finding new accommodation, etc., and the property can be sold. The challenge we had was that these homes that we wanted to sell were in leases, and so the renters had been put into 12-month leases, and we still had quite a number of months to run on the leases. We're talking about, I think we've got about 7 months left to go. Now, here in Victoria, certainly the standard settlement periods, around about 60 days, 90 days, 30 days can be quicker, but 60, 90 is the most common. And so that's 2 to 3 months. So you're talking 7 months. That means somebody has to buy a property but not move into it and live there. So still live somewhere else and still have the bank be okay with that. Because the thing with people getting financed to purchase properties, and particularly first home buyers, they go and seek what's called a pre-approval. And that's the bank saying, yeah, we think you're fine up to whatever the budget is, that we will loan you the money to buy that property. Where there are longer settlement periods, so the timelines are longer, the person seeking to borrow the money sometimes gets reassessed by the bank. So these pre-approvals generally only go for about, I think, 3 months, and then they've got to be extended, which means that all things being equal and there be having been no changes to your circumstances, the bank's going to say, yeah, no worries, you're welcome to, we will lend you the money. We'll still lend you the money. But once you go back and seek an extension, they're going to ask you to resubmit everything, or if things have changed. And what can happen, depending on what a market is doing, if it's going up or down, particularly if a market is going up, and things have changed, or the circumstances for the borrower have changed, they may not be able to have access to as much money. as they previously were. The bank's not prepared to lend to them as much. And so a longer settlement period can cause issues for people. And it's one thing to keep in mind if you're out there hunting at the moment for a property, that if you are not finding a home and you're needing to get an extension to your pre-approval, just make sure that your circumstances haven't changed, because a bank will look at that and you may not be able to borrow as much as you thought you were. And so we had tenants in place in these properties and they still had 7 months to run on their lease, and it started causing issues because the people that were coming in to look at the properties were all first home buyers and they didn't want to basically inherit a short-term landlord. And so this is where things had to get creative in relation to having conversations with the renter as to what could we do to incentivize them to potentially break their lease and vacate the property earlier, because as I said, the interest we were receiving was from first home buyers and they weren't interested in taking on a renter. So that was an interesting process, and I'm going to cover that in my next episode of Property Mama. So what I wanted to share today is that if you are out hunting at the moment and you are missing out, or you need someone to negotiate for you, or you've been to auction and it's gone way over your budget, or you don't have the time, or you're not confident, or you might be living not locally to an area, or not be confident that you understand an area. One of the key things that we do share for our clients is our boots on the ground. We know Melbourne inside and out. And so as your buyer's advocate, that's what we bring to the table. We bring to you our expertise and our local knowledge. And that can go down to the granular street level within any suburb, because all suburbs are different to each other. So when you're looking at a median price, that's across over 330 suburbs of Melbourne. You've got to take it down to the suburb, and then inside of the suburb, pockets of a suburb, down to the street level. And it is that knowledge that we bring to you. I've been buying and selling real estate for decades, and I've seen multiple markets, how markets turn. So no markets are ever the same. And then let's look at what everything else is going on not only a micro but a macro environment, and all these things need to be pushed into the mix of all the calculations when it comes to looking for your home. So if you would like a helping hand, please reach out to us across any of our socials, or you can come to chamberlainadvocates.com.au. Get in touch and we'll have a conversation with you as to how we can find you your perfect home as well. I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of Property Mama Adventures in Real Estate. As always, please do share with your friends, family, colleagues. I'm getting great feedback on the podcast. People are loving it. So I would love to share it with more people, because I have fun doing what I do, and I know those that listen to the show love it as well. So give us a like, give us a share, and I really do appreciate you tuning in every single week to listen to Property Mama Adventures in Real Estate. I'll see you again next week.